Started, I think.
Couple more. Sign-in sheet over here. Once you guys all get settled in, we'll get started.
Here we go.
Well, good morning. I'm Billy Williams. I'm out of Atlanta, Georgia. We're with MSI, and we're going to be training on the Thermacor 1200 rapid infusion system this morning. The Thermacor was designed by a couple of physicians who actually lost a patient due to the older technology and the trouble the staff had setting it up. And they wanted to make something that was easy to set up and easy to use and flexible so they could use it on anybody. And so they built all of that into this, and hopefully you'll see as we go through it that I think they did a pretty good job with it. So the first thing with the Thermacor, it gives you the ability to flow from 10 mLs an hour all the way up to 1200 mLs per minute. It targets 40 degrees C at all flow rates. I say targets because if you're running really slow, you're going to lose a lot of that heat before it gets to the patient. And if you're running really fast and you have nothing but refrigerated blood up here, it's not going to quite hit that 40, it's going to be close to it, but you know, it'll knock the chill off the blood. But very rarely are you going to be using 1200 mLs a minute. So if you do, you've got a serious train wreck on your hands. So. And it also has a backup battery. The backup battery is good for a minimum of 30 minutes at maximum flow rates and a maximum time of multiple hours if you're running at slow flow rates. So basically whatever whatever rate you're using will dictate how long the battery will last, but it'll at least be 30 minutes. And all functions work on battery with the exception of heat. That's the only thing you lose on battery. So literally you can do boluses, you can do slow, you can do rapid, you can do anything on battery that you would when it's plugged into the wall. To turn the unit on, you simply press and hold this bottom right-hand button. You'll see your digital display light up. It'll go through a self-diagnostic, and while it's doing that, you'll see on the screen right here, and then it'll come up and say no cassette. As long as it says that, you know that you passed the basic diagnostic. The next step is you want to remove the component guard. And to do that, we put a 3-position latch on top, and it is labeled up here. You've got, right now it's in the lock position. If you push it perpendicular to the pump, that's the low position. You see you've got a little play in the cassette now. If you go all the way forward, that is the unlock position, and your component guard will come right off. And this should be not thrown out. I do recommend you put a couple zip ties and let it hang from the back of the pump so that when you're done with the case, you've cleaned it up, you can stick this right back on and protect the side of the unit when it's not in use. This is how your cassettes will come. They come in a single kit like this. And you open it up, the first thing on top is going to be your cassette. Everything is sterile packed so that if you needed to take it out of the cardboard, you can, and place it into whatever system you use for storing your supplies. So a couple things you'll notice about the cassette right off the bat is a nice brightly color-coded connectors. This makes it so that if you've never seen it before, you'll still know where the additional disposables attach. This is your roller pump tubing, which I'll talk more about in a second. And on the bottom here, this hinge point, and there's another one here, that's what these bars are for. All right, so when we attach a cassette, it literally just takes seconds without all my talking. But there's 2 things on the pump you need to do first. First is open your roller pump door, and then put your latch into the load position, which is basically perpendicular to the pump. Now, when you're loading this, basically, I always encourage you to use one hand when you do this. Because if you're using 2 hands, you're trying to position it. And when you try to position it, you're just making it harder on yourself. If you use one hand, you rest, let me turn this a little bit so you can see. Can you still see that angle there? Okay. You see I've rested the hinge on the bottom bar, and you simply press forward, and you see this top bar. Once that drops down, you can let it go, lock it down. What you just did is align 4 air, 4 temp, and 3 pressure sensors, that quick. Other systems, and this is one of the reasons they designed with the cassette, you have to floss tubing and everything. This one, the cassette automatically aligns everything for you. Now the last thing is the roller pump tubing, and you simply take the tubing and press it all the way to the back of that opening until you feel it pressing against the back wall. You're just making sure that none of it is out here on these front corners. And by the way, it is labeled inside here, you know, push it all the way in. And then when you shut the door, if you listen, it centers the tube for you. So your goal is just push it as far in there as you can. And so at this point, you're ready to apply the remaining disposables. And the remaining disposables you have in the bottom, underneath where the cassette was, or where your patient line will be. Again, still packed and color coded, as you can see. So I'm going to go ahead and attach this. You pop the red caps off, and not only are the caps color coded, the connectors are color coded and gender coded. So you can see this is the same type of connector as this one. This one's a female, this one's a male. So these will only go in one location. So you press them together, you'll hear a little click, that one's ready to go. Now, you've chosen to use the reservoir here, which we spoke about briefly before everyone arrived. This is a 3-liter reservoir that has 5 spike lines on it. So you can spike up to 5 bags all at one time. It gives you the advantage of having up to, like I said, up to close to 3 liters of fluid in this unit. So what that does is give you that buffer of fluid, so if you've got a massive blood loss that has occurred, you can stay ahead of the curve. Because you have 5 blood bags you can be have spiked plus 2.5, 3 liters of blood a year. So as long as you've preloaded it and got it running before they get there, you should be able to easily stay ahead of the curve. Now, if you can see on the top here, there's a lip, and in the holder, there's also a ridge. So you simply align those, press it in, and you press this black button, and you hear that click, you know it's locked into place. Now, what I like to do is take this one, bring it around the front, and take my spikes up here out of the way. Now, obviously, if you're in a hurry, you don't have to do all that, but for visualization, so you guys can see what I'm doing, I'm gonna take care of it that way. Now, the yellow line is for the return. Whenever it's purging air from the system, it will purge it through this yellow line. It's also used if you use recirculation, which I'll go into in a minute. But if you have fluid that's been sitting for a while and you don't want to let it sit because of coagulation, you can recirculate it. And when it recirculates, it also uses the yellow line to bring it back into the reservoir. So to attach this line, there's a small blue cap on the end, and this, you remove the small yellow cap here, and you just attach them at that point. Use the yellow connector to tighten it, don't twist the tubing. This stopcock that's on here will always be in the right position, so you should not have to work with that at all. Next, you have your, you can see your blue to blue, so you remove your 2 blue caps. And I have not tried attaching this, so hopefully I have the height right. It's a little tight, but you can see it goes together. You just click when they're together. All right, and then now, we simply have to spike a bag. Now, the other thing you may have noticed, I didn't clamp my patient line, and I didn't clamp here. The only thing you really need to clamp are these lines if you're not going to use them. So, but I'm going to go ahead and spike 1 bag. And I'm going to spike 2, but I'm going to leave 1 closed, because what I'm going to do is allow it to run dry and let you see what happens and how easy it is to recover should you run out of fluid in the middle of the case. That's going to happen. You get busy, you use a lot of blood with a patient, then you'll have that occur. All right, so when you're ready to fill it, I'm just going to go ahead and open this one. You can see it starts to flow. You have a defoamer filter in the back here. You also have a 20 micron filter in this white filter in the front. So it will handle, it'll definitely remove any clots. If you had older blood, sometimes it gets used, it will remove any kind of clots that may have developed in that. Once you've reached 300 mLs of fluid, you simply press the flashing prime button, and it's telling you on the screen, unhook patient, press prime. We're at 300, I press and release. By the way, I need a trash can. Can I use this one here? Okay, and you can see it's primed the cassette, and now all you have to do is prime the patient line, and it's telling you that, prime patient line. So you remove the red cap off the end of the patient line, have the clamp in your hand, and you can see the prime light is flashing again. You simply press and release it, and now you're looking for that last air bubble to come out of the patient line. One last effort, and you clamp, and the pump will stop by itself. And what that does is the pump will recognize the back pressure in the patient line and stop for you. And the reason you want to clamp while it's still running is so that you minimize any residual little bubbles at the end of the tube. You know, because sometimes when it stops and you stop before you clamp, you can pull back in a very small bubble. It's not enough to be a physiologic issue for you, but to get maximum fluid all the way to the end, clamp it while it's still in the priming mode. Now let's say you noticed after you looked at this, because it tells you continue prime or start. Continue prime is if you feel like you still had an air bubble in the line. And so let's assume we do, which we don't, but let's assume we do. You'd unclamp and you can press this button again. And you can press that as many times as you need to, and it'll just keep running 15-second cycles until you feel like you've got it ready to go. So now we're ready to go. It's already warm. Nobody ever volunteers for me, so I have to bring my own patient. So I'll bring that up here. I'm going to attach this to my patient. And you're ready to go. Now you can see your default is 120 mLs per hour. And if I press start, and you can see on the screen, as I mentioned before, continue prime or start. So I'm going to just go ahead and press start. And now you'll see that these two numbers will match. I know you can't read it from where you're at, but it says selected on the bottom display and actual on the top. So it's telling you what you want it to do versus what it's actually doing. And you're going to see why that's important in a minute. Now, if I wanted to adjust this, I can adjust the slow flow rate from 10 to 1200 mLs an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust. If you always look at your bottom display when you're adjusting, I'm going to bring it up to about 400. So now let's say we're running at 400. You noticed your patient's lost some blood. You see about 250 ml in your suction canister. You want to replace that lost volume. As opposed to going to rapid mode, the Thermacor has 4 bolus buttons built in. So you have 100, 250, 500, or 1000 ml boluses. So I'm just going to give a bolus as opposed to going to rapid mode. So I press 250. You can see the default flow rate for bolus is 500 mLs a minute. I can adjust that flow rate from 20 to 1200 mLs per minute. So if I'm good with where it's at, I just press start. And now if you watch up here, you're going to see our patient is going to become hydrated very quickly. Now the beauty of the bolus is this is the safest way to deliver volume to your patient, because whenever you have to use a rapid infuser, it usually means you've got a lot of blood loss. It can be a hectic environment. And sometimes if you in other systems that only provide high flow rates, what can happen is you get distracted, and that's unit sitting over there running at 500 mLs a minute. And if you have a bag changer, you can unintentionally overload your patient and create a hypervolemic state. With boluses, that won't happen. You just give a fixed amount, and when it's done, as you can see, it goes right back to where it was in that nice, safe 400 ml an hour drip rate. So you can just give a bolus, reevaluate your patient. If you need another bolus, you can just give another one. Now, with that said, sometimes you have a pediatric, I guess you guys do peds as well? Okay, whether you have a pediatric patient, you might find 500 mLs a minute is too aggressive for that kind of a patient. So what you can do is, I'm going to just hit 100. And if I wanted to slow that down, that flow rate, I simply just press the bolus button and then adjust that flow rate down to whatever I'm comfortable with, let's say 100. And then I press start. From that point forward, all of the boluses will now use that adjusted flow rate. So you only have to adjust one of them, and then they'll all use it from that point forward. Now if you change it again, they'll all use the new modified one. Does that make sense? Okay, great. All right, now I'm going to go back, since I don't want to give that bolus at this point, and I'm going to show you the rapid mode. Rapid mode is designed when you have those patients that you just can't keep up with the blood loss using bolus. Now you have a 1 liter bolus, so it'd have to be a pretty aggressive blood loss, but that happens. So if I want to go to rapid, you can see the default is 500 mLs a minute. So when I press start, I can adjust this from 20 to 1200 mLs a minute. But in rapid mode, you have to remember it's only just going to run, run, and run. So it's either, the only way it stops is if you stop it or if you run out of fluid. And you can see our bag up here is dry, and our reservoir is going to dry out. I'm going to purposely let this one go dry so you can see what happens, how quick it is to recover from running out of fluid. It'll take you longer if you have to spike a new bag to do that than it will to get the pump back up and running. That's how easy that is. So if that's dry, you can see we're just about at the bottom now. And you'll see it'll dry out here, then our tube will dry, and then you're going to get an alarm, and it'll tell you exactly what to do from that point forward. All right, we dry it out, we get an alarm, add fluid, prime, and start. So all you have to do is you clamp your empty bag Open your full bag. Allow it to get up to at least 200 because the cassette's already primed. All you have to do is get some fluid back into the system. And then you can see it tells you on screen, add fluid, prime, and then start. Your prime light is flashing, so it won't let you start until you do that. We have sufficient fluid, and all you have to do at this point is prime this tube, the one coming out of the bottom of the reservoir. So you press and watch the air, you're done. Now, the question is, where did that air go? So I'm going to put it back in rapid mode, and I want you to look right here. And what you're going to find is that air will be picked up here, and then once it reaches a certain volume, it purges it like it's doing right now, and then it goes right back to operating. You don't have to do anything. You do not have to disconnect your patient from the line when you run out of fluid. You just, it will stop by itself, obviously, because it's run out of fluid. You just get it running again, hit start, and it'll take care of all the air in there itself. Most of the response we get after that is, why don't our IV pumps do this? Make life a whole lot easier. All right, so that's rapid. The next mode is your max pressure. The reason we added that is what we found when we were doing market analysis is that with some of the bag squeezing systems, what would happen is people would get in a hurry to get fluid, and they would hang a couple of blood bags into these pressure bags, and they just start cranking up the pressure. The problem is if you don't have a catheter large enough to handle that kind of pressure and flow rate, you'll end up creating hemolysis in that blood and damaging it to the point where you're getting fluid into the patient, but you're not getting the benefit of that blood because you're damaging it, and obviously you could also create problems for your patient as well. So what the Thermacor does is we monitor the pressure in the patient line, and once it reaches the pressure you've chosen, it'll automatically start slowing that flow rate down to prevent exceeding that pressure limit. So right now we've got it at 300. You also have a 100. 100 is designed for pediatric and geriatric use. So if you don't want to get those high pressures on the peds or geriatric, you can avoid that. Let me give you an example. Let's say you've got an 18 gauge catheter in your patient, and you hook up the Thermacor and you're trying to run 500 mLs a minute. Well, an 18 gauge catheter is only going to give you about 184 ml a minute flow rate max of whole blood. So what you'll see is on this select it window, where this is what you want it to do, it's going to say 500 because that's what you want it to flow at. Up here though, it's only going to say about 184 to 200 depending on the mix of fluid that you have in there. So when you see two different numbers here, that's telling you you've got some kind of back pressure going on. And in this case, it's because your catheter is too small. Now, what else could cause back pressure in that line? Obviously, a kink. Another thing that we see is when you get those patients that come up from the ICU, they've left these on the end of the catheter. You cannot leave those on with any rapid infuser because these will restrict flow. And of course, ours will automatically adjust for it, but others will just try to ram it through and you'll create that hemolysis that we were talking about earlier. Catheter size is important. One other thing on this, I mentioned an 18 earlier at 184 ml a minute. So when you see that, you'll think, oh, well, I can go up to a 16 and that's going to help a lot. The 16 is only going to give you 10 more ml a minute. But if you go to a 14, it jumps up to 555 ml a minute. So your 14 is kind of your sweet spot for a rapid infuser. That's going to take care of the bulk of your patients. Now, if you know you're going to have a massive blood need, you need an introducer or some large bore catheter in that patient. And of course you guys know that, so I don't, but just be aware your catheter size is important. And if you start seeing restriction and you know you've got a large bore catheter in there, the problem will always be between the end where the patient line comes out of the cassette and where it goes into the patient. Something between there and the patient is kinked, or there's something in line that shouldn't be in line, like a clave. So always check from there to your patient. That's where your issue is. Now, I also want to show you how this responds. I'm going to leave it at the default 300. Watch how quickly this will get up to 500 mLs a minute. And you see we're already there. Now, when I press the 100, now watch what it does. You see it's much more slow, it's gradual, so it's keeping the flow rate below, or the pressure in the patient line below 100 millimeters of mercury. So it has to go a little slower to get up to speed. So if you have a geriatric patient who has collapsed veins and you don't want to slam them with 500 mLs a minute, start them at 100 millimeters of mercury. And then once you get it up to about 200 to 250, what you can do is at that point, kick it back over to 300 because you know the vein's open. You're running at 200 mLs a minute. And you can kick it over. If you're in a hurry to get fluid in, you can switch it back to the 300 at that point. Any questions up to this point? Good. Heat is always on unless you turn it off. If you want to, for some reason you need to turn it off, you can just simply press and hold it. And now it'll be, whatever the temperature is of the fluid up here, that's what it's going to be going into your patient. Now, what some people will do with this is use it for induced hypothermia. What they'll do is they'll run it in recirculation mode with the heat on. Let me turn that back on. So assuming you have nothing but refrigerated blood up here, and you want to get it up to a certain temperature to get your patient at a certain temperature for induced hypothermia, you simply run a recirculation. You can see now it's running that fluid. It goes from the the reservoir down through the cassette and then back into the reservoir. So it's doing three things. It's heating it, it's moving it around, and it's also refiltering it. So if you had like blood sitting in here for any length of time, it'll refilter that for you. But if you're doing the induced hypothermia procedure, all you have to do is look at the temperature of the fluid here, and once that fluid gets up to the temperature you want that patient to be at, you stop the recirculation, turn off your heat, and infuse into the patient. So that way you're cooling them with a controlled fluid at the core as opposed to externally. And we all know externally the skin's a great insulator. So, but when you do it at the core, you can cool them much faster. So that's one of the options you have available with that. Mute, and I wouldn't even have to tell you, you'll figure out where that's at, but that's right up here in the corner. It's just like every other device on the market, 2 minutes of audio silence when you're done. The last two things are IV pole clamp, and this port down here is really a diagnostic port, so that's really about it. Questions? Yes, sir.
So what fluids can you run through this thing?
Good question. You've got FFP, packed cells, whole blood, saline, LR, but not with blood. You don't want to create a, any kind of clotting effect in there. You should not, and this goes for all rapid infusers, by the way, you should never use platelets or cryo.
What about albumin?
Albumin you can't use this. So now one last point on that is how long are these disposables good for? You can run up to 24 hours continuously with a disposable set, or up to 100 liters of fluid. To put that in perspective, we had a guy that got run over by a powerboat in the Virginias, and it opened up his thigh, his abdominal cavity, and his upper arm. Massive blood loss. Life flighted him in, bypass trauma, went straight to the OR. They ended up giving him 220 units of blood, and nobody thought he'd make it. They all thought he lost so much blood they thought he'd die, but he literally within 12 hours was communicating with the CRNA after the surgery. And they were shocked that they were able to save him. So they needless to say called us and said, we got a story to tell you. So that's the kind of stories you like to hear. But that's it. The Thermacor is designed to be as easy as possible. And I'll tell you, when I do super user training, I don't even tell them what button to press, because what I'll do is I'll tell them, like and I'm the guy telling them what I need for the patient. So give me 250 ml bolus. I'll tell the super users that without telling them what to press, and it's boluses 250, and it'll tell you on screen what to do. So literally, if you've never seen it, if you just sit in front of it, it'll walk you through the entire process. It's very simple to use. So, and of course, the cassette makes it so that you don't have to align or floss tubing in the slots. It's just, again, we tried to make it as easy as possible because it's not a frequently used item. It's not like a pulse ox you're sticking on every day. This is something you're only using periodically. So we had to make it as easy to use as possible because you don't know what person is going to be there to actually set it up at the time.
Does it have to be plugged in?
Ideally, it should be because of the battery. So what I would recommend is if you're not using it, keep it plugged in. And of course, when you are using it, you do want it plugged in for heating capability. Any other questions?
When is this being rolled out in ROR?
That I don't know. Do you have a feel for that, Wes?
So we're training today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
I haven't seen your disposable orders come through yet, so I think they're working on that. As soon as you guys have them, they should be ready for next week. So right now you have one unit. I think they're looking at multiples, so we'll be in touch and figure it out, but I would say next week.
There's no other questions. That was it.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.